Welcome to The Friday Habit with Mark Labriola and Benjamin Manley. The Friday Habit is for small business owners, freelancers, and creatives who are ready to take their business to the next level. Join us as we discover how to apply the strategies we learned to grow our businesses, make more money, and live every day like it's Friday. And welcome back to another Friday Habit. Here we are. Wherever you are in the world, I know it's a beautiful day. No matter what. Well, hey, Ben's not with us today. I believe he is in the Netherlands right now. I'm not exactly sure. We haven't caught up this week, so I'm not sure where in the world. I know he was just in Mexico, and then he's making his way to Ireland. But anyways, next time he's on, we'll get caught up with him to see what he's been up to, how things are going with the business, and where in the world he is. But today, we have a special guest. We have David Dodson on the podcast. He's a veteran entrepreneur. He's been a board member, an investor, and he really demystifies the concept of great leadership in his book, The Manager's Handbook. And it gives you 5 simple steps to build a team, stay focused, make better decisions, and crush your competition. Don't we want to crush our competition? He really argues that effective management is based on a set of learnable skills: team building, time saving, using advisors, priority setting, and quality obsession rather than inherent skills. So Dodson provides a practical one-stop resource that breaks down these skills into easily digestible sub-skills, making the path to becoming an effective, accessible leader to everyone. So welcome to the Friday Habit, David.
Hey, Mark. Nice to see you. And I'm jealous of your partner there, who you can't even figure out what country he's in. So that now he knows how to live.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, Ben is. He's figured out the whole management thing. You know, he created a lot of good systems and processes in his business, and allowed him to spend more time doing things with his family than running the business. So, you'll have to catch up with us when he gets back.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm happy to be here, Mark.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. First, I just wanted to kind of get to know you a little bit. I don't know you from Adam, so I would just love to hear a little bit about where you grew up and where are you right now. And I know you went to Stanford and you got a great education and all that kind of stuff. And you made it to the peak of leadership as a CEO. So I would love to hear a little bit about that journey and kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, I'll start at the most current and then flip backwards. So I'm currently on the faculty at Stanford University at the business school. I've been there for quite a while, and that followed a pretty long career as an entrepreneur and business person. How I got there, Mark, was I grew up in rural Colorado, where the whole world was sort of separated.
Dude, are you in Colorado?
Not now, but that's where I grew up.
I'm in Colorado right now. I was like, you should have just come down to the studio and we could have hung out in person.
That would have been fantastic.
Yeah, where in Colorado?
I grew up in Fort Collins.
Oh, okay.
That's the closest town. Really,
yeah,
it was north of there, LaPorte, Colorado.
Okay, just right before the border.
Yeah, exactly, the border with Wyoming. And it was very, very different back then. So I was trying to say, Mark, that the world was kind of separated between farmers and ranchers. Mm-hmm. My dad made farm equipment, so I was sort of on the farming side of it. And it was pretty rural, and driving into Denver was like the big time. We went to Cheyenne,
load up the station wagon, and make it to the big city.
It really was. It's sort of funny to think back on those days. But my dad was in business for himself as an entrepreneur. Both my grandfathers were. So I kind of like always envisioned that I was going to be in business for myself, even though my dad's business all but failed. It was manufacturing farm equipment, and there were some changes in policy in Washington, D.C. around the price of sugar, and interest rates spiked, pretty much supposed to put him out of business. And my grandfather at one point had a pretty decent sized business mining coal, and it was a type of coal that it was soft, low burning, low heat coal, and it was replaced by a different type of coal. So his business basically went under too.
Like the luck of the draw.
Well, no, it was kind of funny, Mark, because I was surrounded by these entrepreneurs, but they weren't necessarily actually succeeding that much. But I still wanted to be that. So I don't know, but But I was always, when I was a kid, I was always had little businesses on the side. And then when I went to Stanford undergraduate, I studied economics, worked at McKinsey and Company for a couple of years, then went back to get my MBA, all because I wanted to be in business for myself. And I'll tell you something funny about being an MBA back. I graduated in 1987, is that none of the cool kids were entrepreneurs. The cool kids were investment bankers and consultants and all that. If you couldn't get a job, then you were over there at the back table with the entrepreneurs, of which I think in my graduating class of about 400, there were maybe 3 of us sitting at the table, of which 2 of the 3 were there because they couldn't get a job anywhere else. Now that's very different. Now,
right? Yeah, the script is flipped on that, where it's like cool to be an
100%.
entrepreneur. And that's what people are always trying to achieve. Like, how can I work for myself, be my own boss, have the autonomy, have the freedom, so I don't have to report to somebody or create some sort of 5-year goal plan?
It's a fantastic change, and Stanford has a Center for Entrepreneurial Studies, which my primary sort of mentor in life was the person who developed it, and now close to half of the students. So I was kidding a little bit about about the cool kid table. But now about half the students either go to work at Stanford and the MBA program, either go to work for a startup or start a company. So it's become really an entrepreneur school. And it is what led, Mark, to the developing of the book that I wrote, The Manager's Handbook, because between having been an entrepreneur myself, having taught hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs in the MBA program, and then being an investor in, I don't know what the number is, but let's say it's certainly more than 200 companies. So let's say between 200 and 300 companies, I found myself just really obsessed with this curiosity about like what makes some people win and some not. And what was really pulling me is that I saw people who would succeed and some who would fail, who were doing exactly in exactly the same industry. So this kind of idea about entrepreneurship is all about looking around corners and being able to see into the future. My data suggested otherwise. There was something else. And my research and study led me to the very, very strong conclusion that the difference between the people who win and the people who don't win as organizational leaders is based on how well they're able to get things done. And I'll just give you one really easy example.
Yeah.
How in the heck does Sam Walton and his family become, if he were alive today, the richest person on the planet when he's in the department store business, which had been going on since the early 1800s.
Right.
He just completely out-implemented everybody. He didn't invent the department store. He had to compete for leases the same places. He had to buy his soap from Procter & Gamble to resell. He was competing for the same labor pools. All of that, and he crushed everybody else. Or I'll tell you an interesting example, which people don't realize, is Jeff Bezos and Amazon not only did not invent online retail, that was invented, and all the underlying technology was invented 3 years before he got started. But he didn't even invent selling books online. He was the second one to sell books online. And then, by the way, immediately after they went online, Barnes & Noble and Border Books and Walden Books all went online as well. And yet he crushed them all. Well, he didn't crush them all because he invented anything. He just out-implemented them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and you see that with so many other companies throughout the history of the world of just you have an idea. I mean, Blockbuster, Netflix, right? Like, there's just so many companies throughout where it's like they had something and they were doing something, but then someone else came along and just did it better. Is that what you're saying? That they found a hole in maybe the system and process that the company that had been around forever doing it, and then just kind of filled that hole?
Yeah, and they didn't build the hole. I mean, we can always point to some examples of amazing strategic decisions that totally transform the company, but those are the exceptions. And they're always underpinned by good day-to-day execution. So we don't like to talk about it too much because it's not as interesting. But for your audience, it's essential, which is that the companies that really succeeded are the ones that were just good at the day-to-day management. So since I was just talking about Amazon, I'll talk about Amazon. Amazon's the way they run their meetings at Amazon, starting all the way back when Bezos was getting started, they run their meetings in a very specific way. It's very purposeful. They get the most out of the meetings and they make better decisions, meeting after meeting after meeting. Same thing with Facebook. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook. Facebook had no business beating all of its rivals, given that where their funding came from. They were located in Silicon Valley. Zuckerberg did not invent anything with Facebook. He just out implemented people with Facebook. And so the differentiating factor is that they're really good at hiring and attracting and keeping good talent. They're just great at building a team. Second thing in the manager's handbook is this obsession with quality.
Yeah.
Tell me a single company that's not a monopoly that you love to buy products from that are high quality. And I'll tell people, Mark, I'll say, what do you fear? The competitor that's got an unbelievable marketing and sales force and a pretty good product, or the competitor that's got an unbelievable product and a pretty good sales force? It's always the latter because the good product always wins.
Right.
And one of the things in the manager's handbook, one of the 5 things is being a good custodian of your time. And I remember how I sort of got thinking about that initially for the first time. I was at my office at Stanford, and I was meeting a friend of mine who at the time was the COO of Disney. So he had about 250,000 people reporting to him in 6 different continents.
Wow.
Well, I was the one who was a few minutes late, and I was the one who was sort of frazzled, and I was the one who had unanswered emails. He's sitting there just calm as can be, just looking out at the beautiful palm trees and so forth. And I said, Tom, like what gives here? Because you have literally 100 times more employees than I have, and you're the one who's sort of got his act together. And he talked about how he and other people are so good at managing their day and managing their time. And it's not what you do once you get to 200,000 or 300,000 people reporting to you. It's how you get there. It's how you build Walmart. It's how you build great companies. It's from the very beginning. You're a really good custodian of your time. So, that's another thing in the manager's handbook. And when I wrote the book, I didn't want it to be some like breezy beach read for a business person. They go, oh, this is pretty interesting, but I don't know what to do. It's a very, very hands-on book. It's a how-to manual on how do you hire, how do you manage your day, how do you maximize quality, how do you set and adhere to priorities.
That's great. Yeah, this is a common theme on the show. I feel like we've had several guests on recently that say, just you got to do the boring stuff. The stuff that is not exciting, but it's like, hey, just show up, create the system, the process, and then stick to it. And it's just this idea of that you do these things over and over and over and over, and then it starts to produce results, and you start to see success. Yeah. And even to my own, I think about my own company and where we've come, and I've seen so many guys come and go. And really, I think there's a couple of things. One is just the ability to take risks and push through pain. Those are like 2 things that I feel like I see a lot of guys who are afraid to, go on something, and so then it fails, or they just have that, like as soon as something gets a little difficult or a little bit scary or unknown, they bail because it's just too difficult. And then one of the third things is the routines. It's like a lot of creatives, for some of our listeners, right? We have a lot of creatives and freelancers and people like that. And so it's like sometimes doing these things, creating systems, processes, and then sticking to them is just, it's hard. We're just all over the place. So what would you recommend, or what do you say? You have these different aspects in order to be a great manager, but then, what do you say to creating that discipline or sticking to these systems and processes?
Well, I think I really love you keying on that's hard. I was talking to actually my daughter this week, and she's starting something, and there's a number of kind of roadblocks in the way, which are frustrating. And I said to her, well, what you're trying to do is really hard, and that's your strategic advantage. Most people will give up.
Right. And
it's a little bit like, you got to do the push-ups if you want to win the football game, period. There's no getting around it. And there are people out there who are willing to do the push-ups. They're willing to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And those are the people that have this advantage. So what I say to people is I say, look, yeah, it's hard. Okay. So make that your advantage. Are you willing to do hard things? People say, yeah. Well, okay. Well, guess what? Most people aren't. And so that's your huge competitive advantage. So when you look and you look out there and you say, wow, God dang, this is like really hard stuff, and I'm really discouraged somewhere. you should celebrate, because most of your potential competitors and rivals are going to go, well, maybe I'll go back to the job I had, or maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe I'll try something else. But the people who are willing to do the hard stuff are the ones who win. And, let's say that I was surrounded by all the greats, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Sam Walton. They're all surrounding me. And I said, I turned around and I said, okay, hey guys, how many think that what you did was really hard at times? Everyone's hand is going to go up. And then if I said, well, how many times did you have competitors who just say, you know what, I'm going to throw in the towel. This seems like really hard. All their hands would go up. It's one of the advantages that you have in entrepreneurship, if you're willing to do hard things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So you got 5 simple steps. Can you walk us through those 5 simple steps and kind of just give us a little key to each one of those?
Sure. So let me go deep into the first one, and then I'll just mention the other 4.
Yeah.
So the first one is the ability to build a team. Now, I could say on the show or in the classroom or in a board meeting, hey, you got to build a good team. And everyone would nod and say, yeah, thank you very much. But how do you do it? So the book says, it's important to build a team, and here's why. And then here's how you do it. So here are the best practices for interviewing. Here's the best practices for onboarding. Here's the best practices to get data on how your team is through 360 reviews and exit interviews. Here's how you properly let somebody go. Here's how you coach somebody. And so picking up, for example, of how you give coach, I could just say, it's really good to give good feedback, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's heard that before. I break it into 6 parts. Say, when you're giving feedback, do it this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You hit those 6 things, you're going to be giving feedback in the top 10% of your class. So everything is broken down into like a how-to manual. And at the beginning of the book, I say, if I sat you down in front of a piano, and let's say you had all of the great natural talent, okay? But I said, start playing the piano. You go, well, I don't know what to do. And I'd say, okay, well, here's how to sit. Here's how to put your hands over the 88 keys. Here's the difference between a sharp and a flat. And you pull all that together, and all of a sudden you're making music. Same thing with building a team. You do all of these 5 steps, you will have a good team. I promise you. So then there's setting and adhering to priorities. I could say that's important. But if you take Steve Jobs, who was really the master at setting and adhering to priorities, and a longtime board member who comes to my class, Andrea Jung, she had told me once to the class, and she was talking about Steve Jobs' relentlessness about setting and adhering to priorities. She said, we have more money at Apple than most countries. And everybody kind of chuckled. And she said, so can you imagine the number of great ideas that come floating through Cook, the CEO, Cook's office every day? And if we said yes to everything, so if Apple can set and adhere to priorities, anybody can. But Steve Jobs had specific methods that he used to not only make sure that they had set the right priorities, but that they didn't waver from it. So that's the second one. Willing to seek and take advice. Most of the things out there, most of the problems out there have already been discovered, but you can call me up for half an hour and you can get 10 minutes of information out of that. Or you can call me up and you can structure the call in the right way, which again, I just lay it out for you, and you can get 2 hours worth of information out of that 30 minutes. So it's like, how do you get the best advice from people? How do you find mentors? How do you make sure that you squeeze the most information out of them? So that would be the third thing. Then you and I were talking earlier, Mark, about being a good custodian of your time and how you manage your time well. Look, I got the same number of hours in the day as the President of the United States, the Pope, and the guy running Citibank. And they're running much bigger organizations than me because they know how to manage their time. And they have, and you can say, oh, they've got staff. Well, that's how they got there. And then the last is this obsession with quality, which I talked about before. And I just had a conversation with it was a group of people in East Africa, and it's a company, and they had me on their management program. So I had all of them on there, and one person said, how do we know what the customer wants? Because they seem to want everything, and they don't want to pay for anything. And how do we figure that out? And I was talking to him about the steps within the book about how you find out what customers really want and what they're willing to pay for, and why you can have, 2 types of electric cars. You can have a high-end Tesla, and you can have a Toyota hybrid. And they're appealing to different customers because the hybrid customer, the Toyota customer, is not willing to pay for things that the Tesla customer wants to buy, and vice versa. But you got to figure that out. And there's specific ways that you do it so that you win.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm excited to go through this book and really dig deep on it. And I think that everyone who's listening should grab a copy and definitely go through. And again, it's nice that it's a manual to kind of walk you through and give you a good starting point in a lot of places. One thing I want to go back to and maybe talk with you a little bit about is the giving the feedback thing. I think some of us who have teams and even small teams, that is a hard thing to do is give that feedback. And it feels like something that's a little bit awkward at times, especially when you know somebody and you're kind of maybe close to them.
Sure.
So how do you give that feedback? Like as a leader, how do we grow in order to push ourselves into that uncomfortability and give feedback when we need to?
Right. Well, I mean, it starts with this acceptance that it's part of our human nature. But there's a dark part and a light part of the human nature. The light part of the human nature is that, we don't want to deliver bad news. We don't want to ruin someone's day and so forth. The dark part, which I frankly think is the more prominent part, is we want to make our day easy. We want to be liked. We don't want to deliver uncomfortable feedback because it's bad. It's yucky for us. Well, guess what? Two things. One, that's not what you're paid to do as a manager. Okay. It's kind of like doing the push-ups, right? Mm-hmm. But the second, and really the thing that for most people is transformational, is when they realize that when they deliver feedback in the right way, you don't have that, we'll call it that yuckiness, okay? Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that it's how you show that you care about the person, that you want them to succeed. Yeah. Can you imagine any winning sports team where the coach says, listen, I really want you guys to like me, so I'm not going to give you a lot of feedback on how to be a better athlete. And I'm sure that's your preference. I'm really like, what? No, bring it on, coach. Bring it on. Like, I want to win the Super Bowl. I want to win the NBA championship. You bring it on. Well, there's a lot of people out there in the workforce who essentially do the same thing. They just don't know quite how to say it. And once you start giving them feedback and you're saying, I'm giving you this feedback and I'm giving you this feedback in this way because I care about you and I want you to succeed and I want you to get promoted. People start saying, bring me more, bring me more, bring me more. So the manager's handbook starts with this notion that Kim Scott developed, which is brilliant. I describe it in the book. It's about radical candor and how most of us are sort of, we're in the quadrant where we don't want to deliver bad news, but it's really selfish. It's about us. And radical candor is where we make it about the other person. Right. Well, the book talks about how you implement radical candor in a way that it becomes part of the culture. So then, Mark, when you're delivering feedback, it's not so bad. I just, did you watch the Netflix show on the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders?
No. Is it good?
It's really good. I just finished it. And one thing that's brilliant about it, so it's 36 cheerleaders, but they're really just extraordinary athletes and dancers. And that's one of the things you get out of it. But they have effectively a coach. And she is so into the details. And every time she gives someone feedback, they say, yes, ma'am. There's no drama. She goes, yes, ma'am. They want the feedback. And that's why they are so extraordinary out on the field. So that's establishing this culture of radical candor, which I describe how to do in the book in a very simple way. And then you deliver feedback in the 6-part formula. The first, few times you have to kind of be conscious of the 6 steps, but after that you don't even think about it. But it's like, this is my expectation. This is my observation. You make sure to ask, are there any obstacles in your way? You make sure there's alignment at the end. So I go through all 6 of these things, and it's very conversational. But at the end, you didn't give some sort of feedback sandwich where I said, Mark, I really thought this was a great podcast and you're terrific. And then, by the way, I tell you what I really want to tell you. And then I go, but anyway, it's a really good that's called a feedback sandwich. You just want to know the part in the middle, which is the part that's going to help you be a better podcast host, right?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So what was the catalyst for you to even want to get into this and start doing research on this? What were some of the titles that you held before? I mean, how long have you been a teacher, and what were you kind of doing before you got into education?
Yeah, so by the time I was 30, I was out of the business school program and as an entrepreneur. So between about 30 and let's say my very early 50s, I was running companies. Along the way, I was fortunate enough to make some money, so then I became also an investor. So during that first 20 years, let's say I was an investor and also a CEO of a number of companies. Then the Stanford Business School asked me to come back and teach. And so now these like the planets are aligning, which is that I'm standing in front of a classroom trying to teach people how to be entrepreneurs. I've been an entrepreneur myself and CEO
Yeah.
myself. And I also have been an investor where I want to bring out the best of them because that's my
Right.
job as an investor and board member, but also I want them to succeed because we both succeed financially.
Right. Right.
All of it started coming together. And so I started thinking a lot. It wasn't intuitive anymore. I was like, why is this person more effective than this person? Why did this company succeed and this company didn't succeed? Because I want to explain it in the classroom and so forth.
Yeah.
In parallel with that, Mark, I kept getting asked the same questions over and over again. So I started writing out the answers. And so if you called me up and you said, how do you get feedback? We'll go back to what you and I were just talking about. I would email you something. I said, read this, and then we'll talk about it on the phone and we'll talk about your particulars, but this will give you a good base of information. And I got like people were saying, send me more things. What else have you written? Send me more things. So I put it into a little book called The Dog Caught the Car. You know, what does the dog do when he catches the car?
Yeah.
And it was about 80 pages. I'm sure it had typos in it and so forth. And I printed up like 350 copies and gave it out to people. I didn't think anything of it. And I was giving it away. Okay. But still,
Yeah.
it flew off the shelves in the sense that people,
Yeah.
all of a sudden
Yeah, they loved it.
I said, people really like this. So that's what led to writing the book. But when I wrote the book, I did not want this book to be, oh, this is like a victory lap of what I'm in my early 60s. This is like looking back on my career and do it all the way
Yeah.
Dave Dodson did it. There are things in this book that I never ever did. So for example, I never did exit interviews when people left the company. Dumb of me. Okay.
Right.
But when I
Why
was
was that? Why didn't you do exit?
because
interviews?
because two things. One, I didn't know better. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other is I was too insecure. Okay.
Really? Okay. So you felt like, I don't want to hear why you're leaving, and it's going to make me feel bad
I'll
about
go-
myself
I'll do
or
my own
whatever.
narrative and make up my own
Yeah.
stuff. But then when I talked to people who were just extraordinary leaders, they were all doing exit interviews. And I'd say, well, why? And they go, because it's data. It's important data. If I'm going to build a team, I got to know why the people are leaving. I'm like, okay, wish I'd talked to you 25 years earlier. So
Right.
the point of it is that the book is not about manage like David Dodson. The book
Yeah.
is David Dodson, who had the basis of having been a manager and having been a teacher and having been an investor, went out and investigated and looked at these fantastic leaders and said, what are the common traits of these leaders? And by the way, Mike, it was 5 for 5. I could not find anybody out there who was successful who hadn't excelled in these 5 things. It was across the board. And so that's why I read the book, or why I wrote the book. But I also, in addition to getting very detailed, I know what it's like to be a CEO. I know what it's like to run a company, whether it's 2 people or 20,000 people, because I've done both. And so at the end of each chapter, I summarize the chapter. So you don't have to read the chapter on 360 reviews. You'll never have to read it again, because on the last page, I summarize, here are the 4 things you got to remember, so that when you get around to it and you say, okay, I think we're going to do 360 reviews now that it's January 2025. You don't have to reread the chapter. Just go to the last page. You go, oh, Dodson laid it right out for me in the manager's handbook. Because my readers are busy. My readers have a company to run, and they're
Right.
trying to improve themselves, but they still have a day job.
Yeah. Yeah. What have you read the Entrepreneur Operating System?
Yeah.
EOS, and some of the things in that are difficult, especially for, I think, smaller companies, because the way that they approach it is like this big hierarchy of different managers and things like that. So say you have a smaller team, you like, one, I guess my question to you is, since you've kind of done it all, where do you think you should start building your team to, obviously a lot of guys start off and they're the sales guy, they're the doer, they're the janitor, they're doing everything. And then as they start to grow, they start to bring on team members, to maybe remove some of the things from their plate. Is there a particular area that you have seen throughout your career where you're like, yeah, this is a good place to have, or this is a key type of employee that you should start to help you on that growth trajectory?
That's a fair question, Mark. It is a little idiosyncratic in the sense that it depends a little bit on your company, but I can give you some frameworks that maybe your listeners can consider. One is, like, what is your superpower? If your superpower is product design, well, that's probably not one of the things you're going to want to replace yourself with. Maybe that's one of the things you're going to want to keep for a long time. So being really clear on what you're good at and what your superpower is, and making sure you hang on to that. The second thing is that to grow a company, one of the things you need to do is, especially as the entrepreneur, is you're sort of think of yourself as you're the creator. And the creator is not, I mean, of course, it could be the product and so forth, but it could be simply like the system on how you're going to handle expenses, okay, or expense accounts, all right? Your job is to create these systems, these processes, these products and so forth, and you get them all completed, and then you hand them off to somebody. So when you're thinking about building a team and hiring, you say, okay, like I created this whole process around how we manage the warehouse. Okay, I kind of did a lot of it myself. Now that it's created, I'm going to hand it to someone else. Your job is to run this day in and day out. Generally speaking, especially with smaller companies, it's hard to attract people who are going to who are going to be the creators, who are going to create the products. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs that get frustrated. They're like, how come nobody's doing fill in the blank? And I'm saying, well, because that's not their job. Your job is the creator. Their job is to implement it. And as you create these things, then you hire someone and you backfill and you make sure it's up and running. And then you go create the next thing. And then you bring in someone to run that and backfill it and let them manage it. I don't know if that helps a little bit with your question, Mark.
No, I think that totally does. And it definitely makes sense. And the superpower thing makes sense to me too, as far as if that's like what you're good at. I know for me, when I first started, I had a good eye for creativity and I had a good eye for design and photography and video production, and I was good at those things. I had a good eye, but it really wasn't the thing that I was super passionate about, the thing that I really wanted to do. So I was like, okay, how do I work myself out of all this doing? And then kind of focus on, for me, I love building relationships. I love connecting with people, and I love sharing about the things that we do at Brand Viva. And I like to kind of inspire people of what can be, And so for me, it's like, okay, how do I do more of that? And then create enough systems and processes here. And I wish Ben was on this recording today, because he is the master at that. He's built his company in such a way that it is like clockwork and it just runs. And so he can travel the world and do things and doesn't necessarily always have to be hands-on. And so,
and I have a whole chapter, by the way, that, as you know, the chapters are short. Every chapter I wrote, I said, how can I write this in as few words as possible? But so the chapter on delegation, I don't remember how many pages it is, but it's probably like about 10 pages, and it goes through, specifically how you delegate, because also you can have the right person, but if you're not delegating, you don't get to go to the Netherlands, or you don't get to go to Mexico like your partner. You're stuck talking to a guy like me on the podcast, right? AI's coming on board, so I can delegate myself. There you go.
We can have a robot, to carry on the conversations. But actually, I like doing the podcast. I like connecting and talking with people. So I don't want to delegate this part away.
Oh, no. But like I have had so many conversations. I couldn't even begin to estimate how many conversations where somebody says, okay, I delegate, but it never gets done. Like, well, that's okay. That's like saying, I pounded on the keys on the piano and it didn't sound very good. There is a correct way to delegate, that's very easy to learn, that I spell out, which works 100% of the time. And I know that might sound a little bit like, a little hyperbolic to say 100% of the time, but I truly believe that. I truly believe it, because I've seen it in my own companies, but more importantly, I've seen it among the very, very best leaders that have these very clear common denominators on how they delegate. And so that's why we look back and we go, like, how does that guy walk on water and got a red cape and can have X-ray vision? No, they just delegate correctly.
Yeah. What were your superpowers, when you were kind of coming up and starting things?
Wow, I've never been asked that before. Interesting. Well,
what was your first endeavor? So out of college, what was one of the first things you jumped into as far as entrepreneurial or working for a company? Because you said you worked for McKinsey, right? I mean, that's like that's.
I mean, McKinsey was great, but it was more. Truthfully, I can say this now. I'm far enough behind in age. It's just basically made me grow up. I mean, I was going to college in California and having a great time, and life was great. And I got to McKinsey, and they said, "Okay, kid, now start growing up." So it was a little bit like
big boy pants
green
on
boot camp. But I think that probably the part that I always really enjoyed was the product market fit and seeing what the product, visualizing the product and visualizing what the customer wanted and pulling those two things there. I love that part of it. And when it works, and when you go through a process where you have, what's called product market fit, where you're actually making exactly what the person wants and what they're willing to pay for, that's just magical. And then the second, which I didn't really realize that I was any good at this until only more recently, was attracting really, top-notch senior talent. And the reason why, I don't know why I didn't recognize it earlier, but there's a number of businesses that I've started with that are still running and running quite successfully under new leadership after I left. And I realized that I was pretty good at finding someone who could take something and run with it and run hard down the field. So I'd say those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I think that's cool. One is, a lot of times I hear for some friends who've gone through MBA, right? It's like they know more than the teacher because the teacher has just learned stuff based off of theory and book reading, but it's like they haven't really actually been through the hardships and the processes of doing the thing that they're teaching. And so it's cool that you are doing that now. You're kind of educating the next generation of leaders, and you come from a place where you've had experience and you've had to actually do the things that you're doing.
Now,
so.
I want to say this, though. You didn't ask me the stuff I was bad at. And so, you're nice and polite and ask, the way you asked the question. But for example, something I'm not good at is the really important job of like grinding it out day after day, going through, we have something that works. Now just do it day after day after day after day. Maybe do it, 1/100% better than last week. There's people out there that are wired so well for that. I got to bring people into that because I stare at that for 3 or 4 days and then I'm off looking off in the direction. But
what else
that's not a good way to run an organization.
Right.
So there are definitely parts of leadership and organization that I'm not good at that I've learned to say, okay, I got to hire somebody who's really good at that to do that because this is a necessary skill.
Right. Yeah, and that's important, right? To know our strengths and our weaknesses, and then try to backfill those positions. And now I think one of the things for us and for me, it was like trying to find somebody who's really organized and who can stay on top of the things that are coming through the door. Because for me, it's like, I get excited about bringing on the business and building relationships and finding solutions, and then after that, it's like, I'm going to be terrible at email communication. I'm going to be terrible at task management and all those other kind of things. So I need the next person in line after me has to be good at those things. And so,
it's those great that.
Yeah. Well, you have to learn. Sometimes you have to learn the hard way. For me, it was one of those things where, I dropped the ball a few times with a big client, and they sat me down and said, "Hey, like we really like working with you, but." These things happen. I said, oh crap, like I got to fix this right away. So
I love that you say sometimes you have to learn the hard way. I think my life has been always I had to learn the hard way.
Right. Yeah. What is one of the, when you look back on your career, what is one thing that you would say that you remember fondly or that you kind of miss, being in the grind of those things?
That's an easy question. The thing that I miss most, so I have some leadership roles with some organizations, but I'm not the CEO of anything anymore. And the one thing I really miss is the camaraderie of having a team and bringing the team together. And you sort of look back and you go, wow, we all just marched down the field and just spiked the ball. And that's really fun. And then throughout that, you've got these human events in people's lives. Someone gets married. Some of them are not good. Sometimes, people pass away or kids get sick or whatever, but just being part of, the human experience and having those relationships and when something goes poorly for an employee, some in their personal life or whatever, being able to have a role there and not being intrusive, but having a role in trying to ease them across that, that icy river to get to the other side. That I found to be so rewarding, and that's the one thing I do miss about not running anything.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So you got some kids, you got young adult kids then, and they're off and doing their thing, and you said you have a daughter that's kind of has entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, I've got three daughters, and they're all right around age 30, and a couple of grandkids. And
Okay.
as of today, all three daughters like me and are speaking to me. So that's
That's great.
that's
That's a
a
blessing.
success. But no, I've been really blessed with having wonderful kids and three daughters, and now I do have two grandkids. And I've joked
Okay.
with them. I've said, the only reason to have kids was so I could get some grandkids.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, man, I just thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us and giving us a little sample of your book. And I know it's going to be something that's going to really encourage a lot of people and give them some direction and guidance. So I appreciate that. If people wanted to connect with you, what would be a good place to, get in touch?
Yeah, so the Manager's Handbook is the book, and you can get it anywhere. Wall Street Journal bestseller. LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to sort of stay current with the things that I'm doing.
All right, that's awesome. And we like to leave everybody with a tip, something that they can start to improve themselves or their business Monday morning. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody, what would that one piece of advice be?
Two things. One is buy my book, because I
Okay, buy
really
the book.
do think it would help. And
Yeah.
the second thing is start your day with a plan.
Start your day with a plan. Love that. All right. Well, hey, guys, thanks so much for listening to The Friday Habit and tuning in. Make sure you head over to thefridayhabit.com, and there you can find show notes for this episode, ways to get in touch. And at the bottom of the page, you can download our Friday Habit system that's going to show you how to spend more time working on your business instead of always in your business. You can reach us at hello@thefridayhabit. Send us an email if you have a particular guest, somebody you want on the show, or if you have a topic you want us to talk about. Go ahead and leave that feedback. And remember, live every day like it's Friday.